You reach out your hand. The other person reaches back. Skin meets skin for less than 2 seconds, and somehow, in that brief contact, you've already decided something about a total stranger. You didn't choose to decide it. Your brain did that for you, before you even noticed you were doing it. But the real reason your hand moves like that has nothing to do with manners. It's older than manners. Older than spoken language, maybe, and it might still be running on instructions written for a world that no longer exists. Picture this. You walk into a room of strangers, a meeting, an interview, a wedding, anything at all. Someone extends a hand. You take it. The shake lasts maybe 1 second. And in that 1 second, a part of your brain has already started building a profile of this person, confident or nervous, trustworthy or evasive, safe or not. Psychologists call this rapid sizing up a first impression, and it turns out the handshake carries more weight in that impression than almost any other gesture you make. Why does a single second of grip strength carry so much weight? To understand that, you have to go back. Not centuries, not even just to ancient civilizations. You have to go back to a body that didn't have words yet, only hands, and a very simple problem to solve. Is this creature standing in front of me dangerous? Open palm, empty hand, no weapon. That's the oldest theory of where the handshake came from, and it's almost embarrassingly simple. Reach out your right hand, your dominant hand, for most humans, and you're showing someone that it's empty. You're not gripping a rock. You're not hiding a blade. The evidence for this stretches back further than you'd expect. One of the earliest known depictions of a handshake comes from a 9th century BCE Assyrian relief, showing the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III clasping hands with a Babylonian ruler to seal an alliance. Centuries later, ancient Greek artists carved a similar gesture, called dexiosis, onto tombstones. 2 right hands joined together to represent a final farewell, a bond, an agreement sealed permanently in stone. The Romans had their own version too, sometimes grasping the forearm instead of just the hand, partly because a forearm grip made it harder to conceal a hidden blade up a sleeve. A handshake, in other words, may have started as a security check disguised as a courtesy. Different cultures, of course, solved the same problem in different ways. In Japan, the solution became a bow, a small lowering of the body that exposes the back of the neck, historically one of the most vulnerable parts of the body to attack. In India, the solution became namaste, palms pressed together in front of the chest, hands fully visible, fully open, nothing concealed between them. In parts of France, the solution became a cheek kiss, close enough to smell, close enough to read a stranger's expression at point-blank range. Different gestures, same underlying problem. Almost every culture on Earth eventually built some small, repeatable ritual for the first vulnerable seconds of contact with someone unfamiliar. And most of them rely on the same trick. Open hands, exposed skin. Proof that nothing dangerous is being hidden. The version most familiar to you today, hand extended, single firm pump. Eye contact held for a beat too long. Took its now familiar shape only a few hundred years ago, partly through an unlikely source. In 17th century England, Quakers refused to bow to social superiors or tip their hats to nobility, believing every person stood equal before God regardless of rank. A handshake, offered the same way to a king or a farmer, became their substitute, a gesture that couldn't be softened to flatter status because it physically required 2 equal parties meeting in the middle. The idea spread far beyond the Quakers, eventually hardening into the everyday greeting you barely think about today. But here's where it gets stranger. If the handshake were only about proving you're unarmed, you'd expect it to fade away in a world with metal detectors, security cameras, and doormen who already know exactly who's walking through the door. It hasn't faded at all. If anything, it's grown more ritualized, more loaded with unspoken meaning, more obsessively studied. Which suggests the original weapon check theory, while probably true, isn't the whole story. So scientists went looking for what else might be happening underneath that handshake. In 2015, a team at the Weizmann Institute in Israel, led by researcher Eden Fruman, filmed hundreds of people shaking hands with strangers, then secretly tracked what those people did with their hands immediately afterward. Over and over, people brought their right hand, the same hand used in the shake, up toward their own face, often near the nose, often without any awareness that they were doing it at all. They weren't checking their makeup. They weren't scratching an itch. They were smelling the other person. Human noses are far weaker than a dog's, but they're not useless. And Fruman's team found that something on the skin of a stranger's hand, likely chemical signals tied to identity, health, even genetic compatibility, gets transferred during contact, then sampled unconsciously by your own nervous system. You think you're being polite. Some ancient circuitry buried in your brain thinks it's gathering intelligence? Does that sound too strange to be real? It gets stranger once you notice this chemical sampling behavior didn't begin with humans at all. Many primates greet each other through touch and smell, sniffing, grooming, pressing their bodies against one another, and decades of primate research, including extensive observational work by biologists like Franz de Waal, have shown that these touch-based greetings do more than express affection. They regulate the nervous system, they lower stress hormones, they tell the body almost instantly whether it's safe to relax in the presence of another creature. A handshake might be the last surviving fragment of that ancient grooming ritual, stripped down to its smallest possible form, dressed up in a business suit. And the body doesn't only gather information during a handshake, it releases something too. Touch, even brief, formal, 2-second touch, triggers a small release of oxytocin, a hormone closely tied to bonding and trust. Neuroeconomist Paul Zak spent years studying oxytocin in social and economic decision-making, and his research repeatedly found that even minimal physical contact between strangers could shift how much people trusted one another in cooperative situations, sometimes measurably changing how generous people were willing to be with money they had just been given. A single handshake, in other words, can quietly tilt the odds of cooperation in your favor before either person has said a single word. Grip strength alone turns out to carry information you'd never guess from something so simple. In 2015, a large international study published in The Lancet, tracking nearly 140,000 adults across 17 countries, found that grip strength predicted a person's risk of early death and cardiovascular disease more accurately than blood pressure did. Stronger grip, statistically, meant a longer life, which means that somewhere in the half-second of a handshake, your nervous system may be picking up a rough, unconscious readout of a stranger's underlying health, the same way it might once have judged whether a potential ally was strong enough to be useful or a potential threat was too weak to worry about. So a handshake checks for weapons. It samples chemical signals. It releases bonding hormones. It builds a snap judgment of someone's personality in under 2 seconds. That's an enormous amount of work for something you do without thinking, and the snap judgment part is unusually well documented. In a study published in 2000, psychologist William Chaplin and his colleagues had hundreds of participants shake hands with trained interviewers, then measured qualities like grip strength, dryness, duration, and eye contact against independent personality assessments. Firmer, more confident handshakes were consistently linked to people who were rated as more extroverted and emotionally expressive, and those same handshakes left a stronger, more favorable first impression on the interviewer, regardless of what was actually said afterward. A later study pushed the stakes even higher. In 2008, researcher Greg Stewart and his team tracked real job candidates through actual employment interviews and found that handshake quality predicted hiring recommendations almost as strongly as some parts of the interview itself, an effect that mattered most for candidates whose handshake defied the interviewer's expectations going in. Which means, before you've spoken a single sentence in a job interview, your hand may have already testified on your behalf. Here's the twist, though. The part that doesn't sit comfortably once you really think about it. You believe the handshake is a custom, a learned social script, taught to children, refined for boardrooms, occasionally mocked in etiquette guides. But almost everything actually happening inside it, the threat check, the chemical sampling, the hormone shift, the personality read, is running below conscious awareness, on hardware that predates the custom entirely. The ritual is new. The machinery underneath it is ancient. You're not performing politeness when you shake someone's hand. You're running a security and bonding protocol that's been quietly inherited, generation after generation, dressed in whatever social costume the era happened to demand. For most of human history, that protocol looked like grooming, or grasping forearms, or pressing palms together in temple courtyards and trading posts. For a strange, brief stretch of the early 2020s, the protocol broke entirely. A virus made hand contact dangerous, and across the world, people stopped shaking hands almost overnight. Elbow bumps replaced it. Awkward waves. Hovering, unfinished handshakes that turned into something else mid-motion. A nod, a fist held in the air, an apologetic shrug. And many people reported the exact same strange feeling afterward. Greetings without touch felt incomplete. Meetings that should have ended in agreement felt somehow unresolved. Something ancient in the ritual was missing, and the body noticed, even when the mind couldn't quite explain what was wrong. It's no accident that video calls, for all their convenience, often feel strangely thin compared to meeting someone in person. A screen can carry a voice and a face, but it can't carry a grip, a scent, a shift in skin temperature, or the small hormone shift triggered by touch. Every video call you've ever found oddly exhausting or unexpectedly hard to fully trust may be missing exactly the layer of information a handshake was built to deliver. Maybe that's the clearest proof of what a handshake actually is. Not a courtesy, not an arbitrary custom invented by etiquette books and polished by business schools. A compressed, fast-acting ritual that checks for danger, samples chemical information, nudges your nervous system toward trust, and broadcasts a piece of your personality, all inside a gesture so small and so automatic you barely register that it's happening at all. So the next time your hand reaches out on its own, before your conscious mind has even caught up, remember what's actually running underneath that motion. You reach out your hand, the other person reaches back, and in that single second, long before either of you says a word, something far older than language has already decided whether it trusts the stranger standing in front of you.